My Mother, The Person and the Patient is an original podcast written and hosted by me, Fortuna Kuso. This podcast is about my mother, Timira Abdussamid Mohammed, Ayaya we call her, and that's the Somali word for grandmother, and her great-grandchildren call her Ayaya too, and that is their way of saying great-grandmother. In the last decade and a half, living with Alzheimer's, from the onset to diagnosis to today, my mother had lost so much and endured so much, especially her inability to connect with her family on an emotional level and use her words to tell stories. But fortunately for us, my mother told her stories when we were growing up. And I remember it vividly because she didn't really sugarcoat those stories. And it was almost she was telling us as a warning to know how difficult certain situations could be, even when you know it's the right thing to do. Just because you know it's right doesn't make easy doing it. And just because you know it's wrong, it's not easy for you to stop from doing it or to get out from that wrong situation. So as you will hear in the following chapter in this episode, my mother decided that her life depending her ability to continue living and not to die in the hands of her husband depended on her leaving and agreeing to giving up her parental rights to her children. But even then, she told these stories with so much agony, and she struggled with her decision. And even as she sat in that village square and she was agreeing to this situation, she struggled even after she left her children, even the way she left her children, the time of the day she decided to leave her children. All those showed how difficult the situation was. And I can't help but draw a parallel with my daughter's situation and realize that just because you know something is wrong, it's not easy to get out. Because my daughter knew, she was well aware of the difficulty of her situation, the challenge she was facing, the fact that she was really in a terrible situation was very clear to her, but it was so emotionally difficult to pull herself out of there. And each time she pulled herself out, she would go back again to her detriment. I was saying, why can't you stay away? Why are you going back? Me looking outside in wasn't the same as her being in it and having this hope of trying to fix it. Because as you know, in the previous episodes, you could see my mother's desperate attempt as the violence of her husband grows and gets more and more painful. You could see her trying to speak to his siblings, trying to speak to his sister, his brother, his parents, and trying and see if somebody could be an ally to her and convince her husband to stop from doing this. It was not until she realized his first wife had died in suspicious circumstances at the very least that she decided that she needed to get out. But even then, it was quite difficult. So I'm looking back and seeing this whole idea of right and wrong as we see it as an outsider when it comes to women trying to leave or survive in a domestic violent relationship. We can look in as an outsider and say, this is the right decision you're making in my mother's case by getting out, even if that means you lose your children. And in my daughter's case, saying, you are wrong in going back to this relationship and going back, even though you know it's not working. What happened last month is going to happen this month. That concept is based as an outsider looking in and saying this is right and wrong. Just because I see it wrong at my daughter's situation doesn't make it easier for her to get out. We see one situation as the wrong to stay in, doesn't make it easy for that woman to get out. And just for us looking in and saying to women like my mother, it's the right thing to do, doesn't make the leaving any easier. And that has made all the difference. When you listen to how we arrived at my mother's diagnosis and what followed, it's so easy to see her just as the patient, to see her as nothing more than the disease that reduced her to shell of her old self. But I want to also to tell you about my mother, the person, the fierce woman that told her stories unapologetically, celebrating the beautiful parts and harsh realities equally. I want to share with you the stories she told us about her life as a girl growing up in a small village, the tales that marked her adulthood. I want to share with you all her losses and the ultimate winnings. The following chapter is one of those stories reconstructed from my childhood memory. The silence that followed Hassan's departure from the elder's house landed on Timiro like a thick, wet blanket. The sight of his retreating tall frame filled her with fear. She knew the consequence of defying Hassan would cost her, but the layers of regret that descended upon her were heavier than she'd imagined. What have I done? The feeling of dread stretched over the room for a long minute. He will kill me, she said. The fear that began the first week with Hassan had grown terrifying. It's been 6 years and it's getting worse. Timira hoped Hassan's parents to contradict her. She desperately needed them to tell her he would do no such thing. They didn't. They both stared at the ground beneath their feet. Do you hear what she said? The elder's tone was sharper now. What are you going to do about it? How would Hassan's parents respond to such a question? He was able to get away with so much horrible behavior. The appalling way he'd spoken to them. Heaven was beneath your mother's feet in her village, and mistreating your parents was believed to earn you one-way ticket to hell. With Hassan, none of the rules that govern others, including his siblings, seemed to apply to him. What do you say to that? Hassan's elder asked again. Timira's father-in-law lifted his head high enough until he reluctantly met the elder's gaze. What can we do? He said. This is how he is. He took a deep breath. The way Allah made him. Allah made him? The elder yelled so loud that Timiro turned to him at once. You can't blame Allah for his actions. Timiro followed the reaction that reverberated throughout the room. The way the elder's wife nodded in agreement said so much. What do you expect us to do? Timiro's mother-in-law asked. Whatever you do, don't let him touch her. The elder pointed a long finger at Timiro. Not even once. Timiro watched as the elder looked from Hassan's parents to her and back again. We can't pay another tribe. The elder focused on Hassan's father. It hasn't been even 5 years since we last had to do that. Hassan killed one woman and moved on to her. Timira didn't ask that question aloud. What appeared to be a chance meeting with a handsome man was a nightmare wrapped in human flesh. The elder didn't let Hassan's parents take Timira back to her husband until they promised to keep her safe. Her mother-in-law became her shadow from the moment they arrived back home. Hassan's mother's steps moved with Timiro's as if their limbs were attached and mechanical. Hassan's mother followed her everywhere, from the kitchen to the bathroom, from sunrise to nightfall. They put the children in their cots at night and left the room as soon as Hassan came into bed. Hassan protested the first night her mother-in-law took her to her side of the house to sleep. "What is this? A wife abandoning her husband's bed?" He yelled loud, even though he was standing less than 6 feet away from them. Neither his father nor his mother responded to him. Instead, they both watched Timiro. "She'll be staying here." Timiro's mother-in-law pointed at the folded mat she'd brought into the common room adjacent to her bedroom. "It's not like she's leaving the house." Hassan glared at Timiro and his parents before he turned around and went to bed without another word. Timiro closed her eyes, but all her other senses remained alert, heightened to a level she had never experienced before. Sleep eluded her. An hour passed before Timiro heard Hassan's mother speak to his father in a hushed tone. "This won't end well. She leaves, then what? Maybe she won't." Timiro listened as her father-in-law's voice trailed, the uncertainty in his statement heavy like a wet rag. "Do you think her father will see his daughter's condition and leave her behind?" Her mother-in-law must have thought Timiro was asleep. Not a woman will take him with 2 children. It was evident to Timiro her mother-in-law's worry lay with Hassan. His bleak future after one dead wife, another at the brink of leaving him with 2 children worried her. But her statement alarmed Timiro on a different level. The thought of leaving her children startled her. She hadn't thought about anything except saving herself. Now, as the reality set in, she realized she wasn't ready to leave her children. She couldn't do to them what her mother had done to her. She knew the pain only too well, but it was too late, a point of no return. Hassan's mother was right. Timiro knew her father wouldn't be dissuaded. She was in bad shape for her father to look the other way. No father worthy of that title would. "I won't leave my children." Timiro didn't realize she had spoken aloud until her mother-in-law responded. "You have to if you decide to leave," Hassan's mother said. "To save my life?" Timiro lashed out at her mother-in-law, even though she had nothing to do with the situation. It was Timiro's fault, for she had married a man she knew nothing about. She'd fallen for an evil man in her desperate desire to escape the village as her friends had. "You won't be with your children much longer if you ask for a divorce," Hassan's mother said. "Now it's my arm. Tomorrow it's my head," Timiro said. Hassan's attacks escalated from ugly words to pushing and shoving, graduated to broken bones. But the idea of giving up her children to protect herself sent her mind reeling and her stomach in knots. "I have no other option but to leave," Timiro said. The finality of her words made her feel nauseated. "But I will not leave my children." Timiro's father arrived 3 days after she'd sent for him. But her father, standing next to Hassan, his elder by his side, shook her a little. A few seconds passed before she collected herself to run to her father and hug him. Once latched on, she was glued to him. Her father gasped at seeing her broken arm and battered body. "What is this?" He pushed Timira away from him and scanned her body. Is she hit by a car? He asked before he even greeted Hassan's parents. Look at this. Timira's father pointed at her broken arm. Do you see my child? He took her by her broken hand and looked at it very closely. It hurt, but she only winced. You asked me to marry her, to make your bread and bear your children. He stood so close to Hassan that the tips of their noses almost touched. Is this what I agreed to? Timira's father jabbed an angry finger in her bruised face. This is nothing more than a conflict between a husband and a wife, Hassan said with calmness so foreign to him. Timira turned to him to make sure her husband spoke those words. Simple misunderstanding. Misunderstanding? Timira's father stepped away from Hassan and moved toward Hassan's parents. You call broken bones and battered face misunderstanding? Unlike how he'd behaved at the slightest sign of challenge, Hassan didn't fly into a rage. He didn't retaliate. This, her father pointed at her, happened under your watch. You were there for every bunch my child had suffered, and you did nothing about it. By the time he said that, Timira's father was standing over Hassan's parents, and you did nothing. No one said a word for a long while. The silence that followed her father's rage-filled words made the air around them too heavy to breathe. Come with me. Hassan's mother broke the silence, inviting Timira's father and his elder to the table to eat. Timira ate or tried to eat the meal. By the time Hassan's father took Timira's father and the elder to a room to sleep, she felt exhausted for the fear of what lay ahead. The crowd that followed in the elder's courtyard grew thicker by the hour, but Timira watched the children running back and forth between the field where the cattle grazed and the elder's yard where people gathered. Among them, her 4-year-old daughter Amina stood out to her. Timira focused on her daughter chasing after a boy the same age as her but shorter than Amina. Ibrahim, Timira's 2-year-old son, followed his sister, trying to keep up and falling as he went. Her daughter must have pulled the ribbon Timira had used to tie her hair that morning, because her long curls, exactly like Timira's mother's, bounced up and down as she moved faster and faster. Timira followed her children with her eyes as they played a game of predator and prey. By the way, her daughter moved with intent and determination. Timira knew Amina was the predator in this round. Timira smiled when her daughter extended her arms in front of her, stretching, latching onto the boy's shirt collar, and pulled him back. The two landed on the ground side by side. Dust rose and enveloped them with thin cloud. Timira's son reached them a few seconds later and collapsed between them. All three burst into laughing. Their excitement was so infectious, the sight warmed Timira from the inside out. Amina must have seen the joy written all over her mother's face. She got up and ran toward Timira, Ibrahim right behind her. Both kids hugged Timira so hard that they almost knocked her over her seat. Timira kissed them on their heads before they darted to escape from another boy, the predator, closing in on them. The elder's wife and other women from their tribe, including Hassan's mother, finished cooking meat, beans, and cornmeal. They fed the children first, sending each child with a bowl of cornmeal, meat, and beans. The men were next, wiping their hands with the rolled up grass the women passed around. Women ate last. At the end of the meal, the adults moved toward the meeting circle. Long wooden toothbrushes traditionally used after eating dangling out of their mouths. The closer they came, Their eyes remained fixed on Hassan in the seat next to Timiro and his parents. Timiro noticed long fingers pointing in their direction. Hassan kept his head down as if their glares burned into him and hurriedly made him turn away. The women joined the meeting circle last. Their scarves were skewed and their hands were still wet from cleaning the pots. Unlike the men, the women spoke louder, asking questions they needed no answer. How is he going to get through life behaving like this? One of them asked, no one in particular. He's doing just fine, another responded. It's his parents that bear the trouble. With 2 children? Yet another asked with a deep sigh. I would die if he were my son. The woman who spoke first shook her head to announce her dismay. They have only themselves to blame. In her obscure location behind the crowd, the woman could say things she wouldn't dare speak in front of Hassan and his parents. If you rear such a man, you only have yourself to blame. She was standing in the shadow when she uttered that statement. As long as we don't have to pay her blood money, I don't care, another one responded. It was late afternoon when the meeting began, and her father's fury from last night returned with all the power it had. Have you seen what happened to my child? Her father was speaking to Hassan's elder. Have you? Let us keep calm, Hassan's father said. He kept quiet the night before when Timiro's father arrived and exploded angrily at seeing her broken body. Calm? That word seemed to push her father's anger even higher. You expect me to see this and remain calm? The intensity of his words was palpable. What's next? To collect her body? I want Hassan to divorce my daughter. Her father spoke with exaggerated calmness. That was it. The words both exhilarating and damaging all at the same time. Once they left her father's lips, there was no way to unspeak them. Not that she wanted him to, but such demand had no takebacks. Timiro sat up, took a deep breath, and prepared for the consequences she knew were coming. My Mother, The Person and the Patient can be found in Amazon Music, Apple Podcast, or wherever you get your podcasts. Please remember to follow, like, and share, and join me next week as I share with you another episode of my mother's journey as both the person and the patient. Thank you.